we do need to respond to the various climate risks that we are experiencing, and floods is one of them that we observe. Responses need to be taken in a planned manner. We do know that this is going to be the new norm in the future. Therefore, countries, nations, states, etc. need to be better prepared for the kind of responses that need to be framed. Now, broadly speaking, we could categorize the responses in 4 ways. One is, what is it that we need to do with regard to scientific advancements in terms of our understanding on how these extremes are likely to play out in the future, where are the gaps. So, a focus on the research and development side, where possibly we need to progress with regard to our understanding on how these events are playing out, and basically help governments plan in advance with regard to their responses. Then 2, with regard to technologies that we can think about, that we can introduce. Early warning systems are part of the technologies that we talk about that need to be introduced, and there has to be a high density of these technologies placed on the ground to be able to help the people with regard to the warnings that are issued. 3 is with regard to policy, regulation and legislation that may be needed to support some of these these measures or strategies that we are talking about, where we need the government to give the right kind of push so that the technologies are introduced on the ground, etc. So, policy support, regulation by way of which we are monitoring things at the right time to be able to take the right decisions would be needed. Then 4 is with regard to capacity building and awareness raising. People need to know that these are things that are going to happen and more frequently in the future. So, therefore, we need to have a multi-pronged approach strategy to be able to respond to the kind of risks we are talking about in the future. There are no standard operating protocols of do's and don'ts. Who should be responding in what manner when disaster strikes you? If we do have that, and there's enough awareness raising with regard to that across the community, in whether a place is affected or not, I think that's the norm right now. We will have to do it in all places. There are no identified places where floods are going to strike. If you see within India also today, and the case of Pakistan now, that a large part of the country is engulfed with floods. India also, many parts were engulfed with floods, right? So, we do not know whether these floods may strike today X part of the country, tomorrow it may altogether be a new place. So, all communities need to be made aware with the standard operating protocols that are developed, and they should know the do's and don'ts with regard to what they should be doing when disaster strikes them. So, early warning systems basically help you to plan in advance with regard to an ensuing disaster that may strike you, because the data comes beforehand, and there are some forecasts that are done in advance for a 3-day time period or a week, basis which the Met Department provides you the data which feeds in, and your models basically are able to tell you about a week or 3 days in advance what is going to be the likely situation in a particular region with regard to the playing out of weather parameters. Now, with that in context, possibly if we do know that there's going to be a heavy precipitation incidents, and warnings can be issued in advance so that people can be prepared in terms of their response. Now, with regard to what TERI has done, we do a lot of research using the Met Department data and the forecast data and combining it with the climate modeling data for long-term projections to see what are the patterns of climate that are likely to emerge in different parts of the country, in South Asia, etc. So that if we are saying 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we are getting signals of heavy precipitation in the subcontinent, then what kind of preparedness does India and other countries in South Asia need to do to be able to reduce the losses that are related to these events. So, we are basically working on the R&D side with a lot of data analysis that we do, and generating our own data from the climate models to be able to make sense of it to provide policy directions. TERI has also developed a climate tool which is called the TERI climate tool, which is linked to a flood early warning system which is called the FUSE, which we have developed, and we are basically running the FUSE model for different cities of India, basically to see how inundated do cities get if thresholds of precipitation are crossed above a certain limit. So we are able to identify then within the cities, areas that would be waterlogged, which would be underwater for maybe couple of days or couple of hours. So those kind of assessments by way of which we can advise the government, the municipality with regard to choking points in a particular city, and what kind of measures then the city governments can take with regard to release of that water. So maybe better drainage to be created, better waste management in that area so that drains are not choked when water gets collected, etc. So simple measures that even governments can take once the choking points are identified, so that the flooding conditions don't get created.